Hi, welcome everybody to our monthly ambassador briefing. My name is Ben. I am in charge of advocacy here at the American Kidney Fund. So that is why everyone gets emails and calls and texts from me. But we're excited for this ambassador briefing we have today. Deb Darcy, who is one of our DC folks, that she will give an update on the legislative process and where things are on Capitol Hill. And then we have Lindsay, who works on our state team, who will talk about where the different state legislation is going and recent successes that we've had on the state level. So Deb, if you want to go ahead and get started, and you can unmute yourself.
Okay, and sorry guys, let me stop sharing and get to the beginning of this. Okay. Right away, I'm having a technical problem. Okay, let me just hit share screen. Share, and we are going to start this. Okay, thank you everybody for your patience. So today, I know that we have a lot of folks who already know about the legislative process. I see a lot of people who've been through the legislative process with me. So this is going to be something that you've already heard, but other folks have asked for like a Congress 101 and just a quick review of the legislative process. So this is what we'll do. And then after I go through the presentation, I can just give you an update on two of the bills that we have been working on here at the American Kidney Fund. So our agenda is just going to be a quick background on Congress and the legislative process, then a deeper explanation of advocacy, and then I'll talk about our two bills. So jumping right into it, the quick background on Congress and the legislative process. And please feel free to stop me if you have questions. You can just put your question in the chat box and Ben can flag it. So once again, a lot of folks already know this, so I appreciate your patience for the newer people who are still learning. But there are two chambers in the US Congress. One is the House of Representatives and two is the Senate. For legislation to be enacted, it has to be introduced and passed in both chambers. So when we talk about things like a companion bill, if a bill was introduced in the House, we usually call the Senate bill a companion bill and vice versa. So in order for a bill to become a law from 30,000 feet, the bill has to pass both the House and the Senate. And during that process, it usually becomes two different bills. During the amendment process, different members or senators will have different ideas on how they want the bill to be. So it will pass in both chambers. From there, it goes to a conference committee. So conferees will be appointed from both the House and the Senate. They will work to make the bill one bill. So they'll work out all of the differences, come to an agreement, and then that bill has to pass both the House and the Senate before it goes to the president to get signed into law. In terms of the makeup of the 117th Congress, so every 2 years there's a new Congress, and we are in the 117th Congress. And as I think most of the folks know, but some folks don't, each member of the House of Representatives is elected every 2 years, and senators get, they serve for 6 years, and they're staggered. So every 2 years, a third of the Senate is up for re-election. But for the House of Representatives, right now the breakdown is there's 219 Democrats, there's 212 Republicans, and there's 4 vacancies. So the Democrats right now are in the majority. So for leadership, the Speaker of the House is Nancy Pelosi. She's from California. And the Majority Leader is Steny Hoyer. He's from Maryland. And the Majority Whip is Jim Clyburn, and he's from South Carolina. For the Republicans, the minority leader is Kevin McCarthy and the minority whip is Steve Scalise from Louisiana. Some folks have questions about what a whip is, and the whip generally is the person that goes around and counts votes, talks to members to see if they have the votes. And why they're called the whip is because leadership tries to keep people in line and to get their votes. So the whip generally either tells people to vote yes or vote no. If they don't want to vote in a certain way, they sit down, they discuss things with them to see how they'll vote and why. In the Senate, right now, there are 48 Democrats and 2 independents who caucus with the Democrats. So you have essentially, for all intents and purposes, 50 Democrats and 50 Republicans. Vice President Kamala Harris will break the tie. So even though there's 50 and 50 Democrats and 50 Republicans, the Democrats are considered the majority because Kamala Harris, the vice president, will break ties. So for leadership in the Senate, the majority leader is Chuck Schumer, he's from New York, and the majority whip in the Senate is Dick Durbin from Illinois. The minority leader is Mitch McConnell from Kentucky, and the minority whip is John Thune. In terms of committees of jurisdiction, we work obviously on kidney policy. So Energy and Commerce Committee, they have jurisdiction over a lot of health insurance plans. So they have jurisdiction over qualified health plans that are bought and sold through the marketplace. The Ways and Means Committee has jurisdiction over Medicare. And since most dialysis patients are eligible for Medicare, we do a lot of work with the Ways and Means Committee. Education and Labor Committee has jurisdiction over ERISA plans and self-funded plans, which are health insurance plans. So we do some work in there. The Budget Committee decides on aggregate amounts that the federal government will spend in a year. So if you hear about a budget resolution, that comes out from the budget committees. And then the Appropriations Committee deals with the aggregate numbers and essentially says how much each program in the government will be funded. So usually about this time in spring, we'll do an action alert and ask you to contact your members of Congress to ask for certain fundings for the National Institute of Diabetes, Digestive and Kidney Diseases. That's the NIDDK. The Appropriations Committee decides how much money goes into kidney funding research or research for kidney disease. In the Senate, the committees of jurisdiction are the Finance Committee. The Finance Committee has jurisdiction over Medicare. Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, the HELP Committee, has jurisdiction over health insurance plans that are not Medicare. And then once again, the Budget Committee decides on aggregate amounts, and then the Appropriations Committee decides within those amounts which programs will be funded at which amounts. So the legislative process in theory is you come up with an idea, and ideas can come from you, the constituent. They can come from nonprofit organizations. They can come from members of Congress. They can come from the administrative branch. The legislative process in theory essentially means that when there's an idea, a bill gets introduced, there's legislative research done, it gets referred to a committee, it goes to subcommittee review, there's a hearing on it, it goes to full committee, it will go to the floor of the chamber in the House or the Senate, and then there will be a vote. And once again, after it passes in each specific committee, it will go either to the other committee or they'll have a conference report, and then it will go to the president to be signed into law. So in theory, that's what's supposed to happen. But this is essentially what happens in the real world. There are some bills that have started like 3 Congresses ago and they get worked on. And then after each Congress, all legislation, we say legislation dies and it has to be reintroduced. So some bills that get enacted actually had hearings in a previous Congress. And there's lots of ways to influence the process. So we are gonna just jump into how to influence the process. So real quickly, what is advocacy? It's an organized activity with the purpose of influencing the formation of public policy. It's communications and activities that educate Congress and policymakers and the public. And advocacy is also communications that build public support. In order to get legislation passed, there has to be a majority of members of Congress who want this to happen because it takes the votes. And this is why some pieces of legislation take years and years, because to talk to each member of Congress and educate them and make sure they understand the legislation and then get their support. So more specifically, it's influencing people and policy structures and systems. It's lobbying, but it's also mobilizing and educating and networking, talking to people, talking to friends. And you can advocate alone or with a group or within a coalition. And your advocacy can be aimed at immediate results or a long-term objective, but also advocacy holds those in power accountable. The people who are members of Congress depend on you for their vote. So you can, you have the right to petition them under the Constitution, so you can see where they stand on issues. So that's one reason why advocacy is so important, but also it empowers individuals to speak up for themselves. And why people should advocate. And it's because they develop as agents of change. They make the world what they want the world to be. You can generate more resources for kidney disease and kidney research. You can change power structures, systems to support or enhance programs for people with chronic, rare, or terminal illnesses. And once again, and most importantly, a representative democracy relies on the bond between constituents and their legislators. And decisions will be made regardless of who participates in the process. Your personal experience and expertise can actually enhance the decisions made at the local, state, and national levels. Legislators can make their decisions based on your experiences, and they need to hear from you. And also your experience and your words can affect the policy outcomes. So ways to communicate with Congress: personal contact, meetings, phone calls, but also getting to know your legislators and creating a relationship with them is one of the best ways to communicate with Congress. There's phone calls, individual letters and emails. There's Hill Lobby Days. Every year we have our fly-in. There's tweets and Facebook. A lot of legislators look at the tweets. So if you want to tweet your legislator about an issue, that's a great way to communicate with them. District events and candidate forums, and also mass mail campaigns. So some of the ways that you can advocate with AKF, we have in-district meetings. Ben's been holding them. Virtually, we have social media, there's state advocacy, we have action alerts where we ask you to email your legislator. We have these Ambassador Monthly Zoom briefings. And also we can help you write a letter to the editor, because a lot of legislators also read their local papers. So before I open it for questions, I just want to tell you about two pieces of legislation that we've been working really hard on. The first one is HR 1255 in the House and S377 in the Senate, and that is the Living Donor Protection Act. And what it will do is it has three main components. The first one is it would prohibit life insurers, disability insurers, and long-term care insurers from discriminating against living donors. There was a study done in 2014 where 186 living donors were surveyed, and about 25% of them had some difficulty getting life insurance. And that was either they were charged a higher premium, they were offered a smaller benefit package, or they were not offered a plan. And we've seen in longevity studies that living donors live just as long as people who are non-donors, so they shouldn't have had any problem at all based getting a life insurance plan. So we've been working on that, and we had a really good meeting with members of the Energy and Commerce Committee. So we are hopeful that there'll be movement on that bill. And also the bill would also codify a Department of Labor opinion letter that said people who donate organs will have protections under the Family Medical Leave Act. And finally, it would have HHS update their website and brochures to let living donors know that they can't be discriminated against by life insurers, long-term care, and disability insurers. The other bill that we've been working pretty hard on is the Medigap, the Jack Reynolds Memorial Medigap Act, and that is HR 1676. And right now there are 19 states where ESRD patients who have Medicare Medigap insurers are not required to offer them plans. So as everybody on the call knows, Medicare beneficiaries need access to a Medigap plan. And we've been working on that. The bill would require Medigap insurers to offer Medigap plans to ESRD patients who have Medicare as their primary insurance. They'd have access to a Medigap plan, regardless of what state they live in. So from there, I will open it up for questions, or we can move on to the next portion of our meeting.
And so if anybody has a question, you can just either put it in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and just go ahead and ask it. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and make Lindsay a co-presenter now, and then she will give an update on all the great stuff we've been doing on the state level.
Fantastic. Let's see. Go ahead and share my screen. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I love coming to these meetings because I feel like I see so many familiar faces or get to meet new people. So it's really great to have these. So thank you, Ben, for putting these on. And I'm sure if any of you have gotten an email or text from Ben about any of our state legislation, that's because I'm bothering him and asking you all to participate in the legislative process at the state level. But very similar to the way how the legislative process works at the federal level that Deb described, it works very similar at the state level in terms of the makeup and how a bill becomes a law. Something that is quite different at the state level is the time that states are in session. And what that means is when lawmakers are able to introduce bills and get them passed and sent to the governor for signature to become a law. It ranges from, a 3-month legislative session in some states to a year round, unlike the federal government where it's a 2-year process for each session. But wanted to give an update on the progress that we've made this year in the states, and some of the states have already gone out of session, or some are currently still in session that we're working to pass these laws. But the first one is the Living Donor Protection Act. So it is similar to what we are working on at the federal level. So while our team is working really diligently at the federal level to get the Living Donor Protection Act, we're kind of working, behind the scenes at the state level to get these enacted really quickly, but then have greater protections at the federal level as well. Of course, we certainly want that. We want there to be a baseline of protections for living organ donors. And the piece of the bill that we typically pass at the state level is the first piece that Deb had shared, which is the prohibiting any discrimination from life, long-term, or disability insurers. And you can see we've had a lot of success this year in some of these states like Kentucky, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Washington, and Texas, which is really exciting because some of those states, it was a 2-year process to get that finally enacted and signed into law. So we're really excited about that. We anticipate the next state being Connecticut. But you can see it's really, really fun to get engaged at the state level. It's much different than at the federal level. There's a lot of opportunities to testify and have conversations with your state lawmakers. So you can see some of our ambassadors testifying, one in Washington and one in Kentucky. So if you're ever interested in potentially taking the next step and speaking out and testifying during a hearing, at any of the bills that we have at the state level, please reach out to myself and Ben. It's a really great experience. And something that I would really encourage everyone to do actually is take a look at our website for our report card that we have for living donor protections in each state. We give a grade to each state and we give updates on what grades are, bumping up once a new state passes the Living Donor Protection Act. So I highly encourage that. I can send that in the chat function button or have Ben shared around after the meeting. But it's a really great way to see what protections are available in the state. And if they're not already there, we're certainly working on that in either the current session or next year to get it enacted. Another piece of legislation that we're working on that's really proactive to help improve the lives of kidney patients is this chronic kidney disease task force. And so what this task force does is it brings lawmakers and other private groups like ourselves and doctors and people in the community in your state to really dig deep into why chronic kidney disease is rising in the state and the disproportionately high the impact that it has on minorities. So what this task force will do is bring awareness so we can have more screenings, early detection of kidney disease, and create more health equity in the state and reduce the burden of kidney disease. So we have a lot of bills pending still. We're very hopeful that we'll get this passed in all of these states. And what's really great about the bill is there is going to be a representative from the American Kidney Fund that sits on the task force to participate, and they'll meet quarterly and have a lot of great findings and different data points that they can bring back to the legislature to hopefully propose a new way to really tackle kidney disease. So we've had some ambassadors testify on these bills in the states. And I actually just found out that as of a few minutes ago that our Louisiana task force has just passed the House and is moving over to the Senate. So it's really great news and really exciting to create these task forces. And the last bill that I'll speak about to give an update on is these bills that have anti-discrimination in organ transplant. So if you have any intellectual disabilities, it really puts more protections into law so that there's no way that there's any discrimination that can happen when you are trying to receive an organ transplant. So there's currently 15 states that have enacted this law. And you can see on the screen here, all of the other states were either introduced and still pending, or the green means it's a good sign, it's been passed, it's been signed into law. So we're really thrilled about the progress that we've made in terms of prohibiting any discrimination in receiving any organ transplant in the states. So I'll pause there, I'll stop. If there's any questions that you have, I am happy to answer, or please feel free to reach out to me directly. But it looks like there is something in the chat, so I'll check this out. There are no Southeast states included. Okay, great, yes. So thank you, Francis. Pointed out that there were no Southeast states included for the task force bill. So if it has not been introduced this year, we will certainly work in each state in the upcoming sessions, and we'll certainly add more Southeast states to our collection of task forces that will be introduced. So thank you for that question.
And so I'll also add that an issue that was around this year was also that there were still a lot of COVID restrictions. And I know the Maryland General Assembly had a shorter session, so there was less opportunity for any type of bills, legislation, anything to happen in Maryland. And so I know that was the case in some other states as well. I can't tell you off the top of my head how many states had shorter sessions, but next year, there will be a full calendar. So there'll be a greater opportunity to get more legislation out there.
That's a great point, Ben. There were a lot of COVID restrictions still happening at the beginning of the year. It's certainly started to open up a lot more, but we will certainly work to introduce more of the task forces, and depends on state by state. Some lawmakers are only allowed 5 bills to introduce for the entire session. So it really depends on state by state, but when we're not in legislative session for a majority of the states during the summer and the fall and winter, we're having conversations with lawmakers, just to bring up the idea to them, so that they can introduce it in upcoming sessions, so in 2022. So that's certainly what we'll be doing once more states start to die down. And then another note that the House whip from South Carolina may be relevant. It's certainly helpful having the leadership in your state. That's for sure. So that can definitely help.
Does anyone else have any other questions? Okay, so then we'll stop the official portion of the presentation now, and I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today for this ambassador briefing. And I will stop the recording, and then we can have our open-ended Q&A. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us so far.